The clock is always ticking. Hey everybody, and welcome to the second episode of First Time DM Diaries. So in the last episode, I actually forgot to bring up 3 very important points which are integral to this episode, so I'm going to get them out of the way now. So, point number 1. When Hork first received the job from Vulpes, he was actually given a special insignia. This insignia let him know that this job was from the Riverfall Spymaster office, so effectively he was working for the local intelligence agency. Second, after they defeated the goblins in the Boulé, they had searched around the area to find any treasure. They had discovered a mace. Now this mace was emaciated. I'm funny. It was rusted out, it was missing spokes, it clearly hadn't been used in a very long time, and who knows how long ago it was made. The players all tried to determine if there was anything special about it, but I think Hork, who rolled a 13 on his Arcana check, was the only one who rolled near high enough to determine that, and with that roll I let him know that he could at least tell there was some power in this mace, so he took it. And finally, the third point I wanted to mention was that when Petrie met with those 2 gentlemen on the road, before they had parted ways, the drow decided to shake his hand to show there was no hard feelings. Well, when he shook his hand, I had Petrie roll a sleight of hand check. He succeeded, and I let him know there was an insignia slid into his palm that was the face of a clock at 7 o'clock. So with all of that out of the way, let's begin talking about my second session. So in this session, we actually introduced a new character. This character was a dwarf, a paladin of the same oath that Littlefoot was, and a former soldier. In fact, the backstory was he was Hork's handler during the war. You know, in case Hork went and did something stupid, he'd have someone watching over him to make sure he didn't do anything too stupid. This dwarf is named Ducky. I mean, hey, we got the theme, we may as well keep rolling with it. So our previous session ended with Vulpes, the players, and a goblin inside of his office. Vulpes looks to the goblin, leans across his desk, and just says, "Talk." Now this goblin, as I had mentioned previously, had 1 hit point left, and I told the players that. So, they decide bullying the goblin. Because why would you not do that? I think Littlefoot said he shoved him, and then Petrie said he sneezed on him. To which I said, you know what, that kills him. At first I was joking, but then I thought about it, and I said, you know what, no, you actually literally killed him. The goblin's dead. We all got a good laugh out of that, but Vulpes was not laughing about that. He just rolled his eyes, looked at the characters disappointedly, and decided to debrief the soldiers they brought back. Now remember, one of these soldiers they give a shot of the mushroom wine, and he is entirely wasted, so he's in no condition to be talking. And this soldier, they determined, was the captain, so he was in charge of this expedition. So they go to the basement of Frank's bar and they talk to all the soldiers. It was Hork, Ducky, and Vulpes at this point, along with the soldiers. Vulpes asks them all what happened. They relay the story same as usual, but the captain, who's wasted, adds the part where they met the people that were trying to buy them, because Hork left that part out. Vulpes looks to Hork. Hork lies directly to his face. He rolled, I want to say, a 19 on deception, incredibly. So you just lied to one of the spy masters. So the way I worked around it was, I said to Hork, so you know he knows you are lying, but he knows he has no way to prove it, so he just drops it. And then Hork decides to get cocky. He says, hey, can I roll intimidation on all 4 of the other soldiers so that they don't talk either? I'm like, you want to roll intimidation 4 times in a row to maintain your lie that you just got away with. Okay, and I shit you not, he rolls 4 times in a row and succeeds all 4 of those rolls. He rolled like an average of 15, I think. So the way we played it out was Vulpes went down the line talking to all of the soldiers, and Hork was behind him the whole time going. Something else important to point out about this segment was Vulpes, when he was talking to the soldiers, he didn't call them soldiers, he called them agents. Ah, now the plot's thickening. So after the debriefing, they began walking back upstairs, and Hork asked Vulpes, well, what do we do now? Vulpes, looking a bit agitated, says, well, this is an act of war, and I am not happy about that. The problem is, we need to prove they were over here, and then we'll start a war. Perfect, they just need to get proof, then they can start a war. That does not happen for the next 4 sessions. So in the meantime, Littlefoot and Petrie decide they're going to drink mushroom wine, go to the bar next door, and cause trouble. The reason for this was they discovered the owner of the bar next door didn't like Frank, and if you don't like Frank, quite frankly, you just don't deserve to live in this campaign. So, they go next door. First thing they do, Petrie takes Littlefoot and slides him across the bar, knocking over all of the drinks. Petrie then says, "Hey, I'm gonna buy the cheapest drink I can." Okay, 1 copper. I had the bartender just go to a barrel in the corner, scoop warm beer out of it, and grudgingly hand it to him. He said, "Is there a chandelier?" I said, "There sure is, bud." He's like, "I'm gonna throw this beer at the chandelier." He rolls a natural 1. I say, "Well, the good news is you hit the chandelier. The bad news is it landed on you." I had him take, I think, 5 damage. It was nothing crazy, but then I told him, "Well, now you have glass stuck in your face." Then Petrie says, "I'm gonna go up to the smallest guy I can, go right in his face and just yell, 'Woo!'" I didn't know he was Ric Flair. This gave me an opportunity to introduce an NPC I was holding on to. I said, "You see a high elf, a young man with glasses minding his own business, staring straight down at 2 books. One book he's reading from, another book he's writing into." And Petrie said, "He's been ignoring all of this?" I'm like, yes, he has. So Petrie goes right up in his face and starts wooing. The elf just kind of looks up quizzically and says, "My friend, are you all right?" He woos in his face again, and then steals his pen, and then shoves it up his ass, and then gives out a deflated woo. Yep, this is the party I'm dealing with. Afterwards, he just kind of wanders out of the bar, realizing he needs to rethink his life choices. Littlefoot then walks up and steals this kid's book. This kid, who is probably 5'5", stands up, walks right up to this dragonborn and says, "Give me that back." With no fear in his eyes whatsoever. Littlefoot refused. I said, "Roll initiative." Now, I could have said no take backsies on that, but then he's like, "Wait, can I at least roll intimidation?" And I figured, you know what, I'll give you a shot, roll intimidation. He rolled really high, although I think they're all proficient in intimidation because they just want to be bullies, apparently. He rolled high enough, I had this elf back down, and Littlefoot said, "Look, I'm going to sober up in the morning, come next door, we can talk about this book." Okay. While all of this was going on, Ducky and Hork went across town to the armory. Vulpes had offered Hork reinstatement in the army, but Hork did not want that. His reason being he didn't want people telling him what to do. Fair enough. Vulpes said, "Tell you what, I will reinstate you under direct orders from the Spymaster office, so you only answer directly to me." Sounded good to him. So he goes to get himself reinstated, the paperwork goes through fine, and Hork asks, "Hey, can you guys spare some soldiers for us?" The captain of the guard just looks at him and says, "Why on earth do you need soldiers?" I don't recall what Hork's answer was, but I had him roll for it, and he rolled, I want to say, a 2, so that absolutely was not happening. Then Ducky interjects and says, "Hey, as his handler, we may need some extra troops to keep an eye on him." I said, "Okay, roll for it." He rolls a nat 20. At that point, I had the captain of the guard say, "You know what, fine, I'll spare 3 soldiers for you." These soldiers? Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Now here's the part where my inexperience as a DM shows, because instead of just looking in the monster manual, which I didn't have at the time, but I was still looking online, and just picking a normal soldier out of there, I rolled up and statted 3 level 4 fighters. Here's the problem with that. Players that are statted are almost always better than the monsters that are statted. And I think it's balanced that way on purpose because you want the players to feel like they're heroic. Players get feats and abilities monsters do not. So if I had found a challenge rating for monster of roughly the same equivalence, it wouldn't have been as good as these 3. And ever since I introduced Huey, Dewey, and Louie, these 3 are some of the most badass characters in the party. But it's fine. They're a staple, and we all have fun here. Hork then says, "Hey, is there a smith where I can get this mace looked at?" I said, "Absolutely, you just go right down into the basement." And as he goes down to the basement, he starts noticing the doors and hallways are getting wider and taller. And this became apparent when he got to the smith and realized he was a giant. To which Petrie, who wasn't even there, interjects, "Wait, if the doors are big down there and not outside, how did he get in the building?" "Because I fucking said so, that's why." Both he and Ducky managed to get themselves some armor without their insignias on it in case they had to do undercover work, and I had him patch their armor up to give them both +1 to AC. Now, Hork also handed him this mace, wondering what it would do. If you're wondering why I made this person a giant, this is why. He hands this giant the mace, the giant begins looking at it, and pricks his finger, and then screams and drops it. He looks at Hork and says, "Where did you get that?" Hork's like, "Don't worry about it." The giant then informed him, "That is a mace of giant slaying." Then Hork, out of character, says, "Ooh, I should intimidate him with this." I am amazed he didn't. But they had got what they wanted and decided to go back to the inn. Now the next day, Littlefoot and Petrie wake up to discover that they have a pen and a book and they don't know why. I point out the book is written in Elvish. Petrie can read Elvish. He begins reading it, and this is what it says. "Can burrow through non-magical unworked earth and stone. While doing so, the elemental doesn't disturb the material it moves through." Yeah, they couldn't glean anything from that either. So they both walk downstairs and discover this high elf waiting for them at the bar. He politely introduces himself as Roger and says, "I would like my book back." They have no recollection of the night before because that mushroom wine knocks them the f*** out. But they do have a brief back and forth, and they ask him what the book's for. He tells them that he's working on a survival guide for the wasteland. They say, "Okay, fair enough," and hand him the book, and he goes on his way. He was smart enough not to take the pen back. So now Petrie, who has this insignia, sees the face of a clock with 7 o'clock. He investigated the insignia and rolled high enough insight for me to let him know that there's a clock tower in the center of town. So he waits till 7 o'clock p.m. Now many of the lights are out in the city, but at exactly 7 o'clock he sees a single warehouse down by the docks light up. At this point, he knows what he has to do. So he walks back into Frank Bar and says, "Okay, Littlefoot, we need to go meet up with these Stonevale people." Then he turns to Ducky, Hork, Huey, Dewey, and Louie and says, "None of you can come." To which Hork is like, "What the hell do you mean we can't come?" He says, "We're about to meet with Stonevale people. You are soldiers for this side of the river. You're gonna try to kill them. You cannot come." And this goes back and forth for what felt like roughly forever, but in reality was probably 5 minutes, with Hork finally frustrated, throwing his hands up and saying, "Fine, we're gonna stay here and try to buy the bar from Frank, and you are not allowed back here." Yeah, fine with me. I kind of figured they were going to try to buy the bar, I just didn't think they'd try to do it in the second session. So, while Ducky and Hork had absolutely nothing to do, Petrie and Littlefoot head down to the docks. They see this warehouse, knock on the door, and are greeted by a tiefling. A very familiar tiefling. It's their good friend Spike. Both of them show a combination of amusement and amazement that he even survived. But Spike doesn't really seem all that upset. The way he sees it, they got him off the boat. So he invites them inside and says, "Are you guys here for the meeting?" They're like, "Yes." What was this meeting? Well, this meeting was for the revolutionaries of the kingdom known as the Calendar Council. Don't like that name? Don't worry about it, neither did my players. Serves me right, I ripped it off. A speaker took the stage and he gave an impassioned speech about those who were left destitute by the war, about those who had lost their sons, their fathers, and their family members to the slaughter, about those whose homes were destroyed when the giants made of iron came from across the river and destroyed everything. He encouraged people to rise up against their rulers, to have no masters, no more wars, no more death. The players didn't like this speech either. Petrie then asked this man, "What exactly are your plans to overthrow the government?" This man let him know that they had stolen a large amount of black powder and planned to blow up the docks and the clock tower in the center of town to cause mass chaos. Petrie loved this plan, so he actually agreed to help with it. Then came problem number 2 of the session. On the way back to the inn, Littlefoot starts looking up his alignment, and looking up his oath, and looking at his class. It is at this point he realizes, due to his oath, he cannot allow innocents to come to harm. And this is where the 25-minute argument started. So the problem was, Littlefoot did not want to kill innocents. Petrie then argues, well, they're not innocent, it'll be soldiers. Littlefoot says, you mean to tell me there will be absolutely no collateral damage from blowing up a clock tower in the docks? Petrie says, you can't prove that. Littlefoot says, that doesn't matter, it's against my oath. Petrie turns to me and says, can I roll persuasion to convince him that his oath is not interpreted that way? To which I said, dude, you're not persuading the character anymore, you're trying to persuade him. And I'm sorry, if he interprets his oath that way, that's the way he interprets his oath. To which Petrie, being clever, then says to Littlefoot, bet you won't break your oath. Nice try. And this had gone back and forth and so long, and now Hork and Ducky, the two players who hadn't been playing the whole time, are like, will you two just stop? Finally, we managed to settle on, no, you are not helping the revolutionaries. So they go to Frank's Inn, talk to Hork and Ducky, let them know what had happened, and let them know what the plans are. Hork and Ducky say, well, we gotta stop them. Petrie at this point is still not quite down on the plan, but Hork says, tell you what, first thing we do, we kill Spike. Deal. That was good enough for them. They went and told Vulpes what had happened. Vulpes opens up a book, begins writing in it, tears the piece of paper out, throws it in the air, and the paper disappears. He looks back down, and more writing appears. He then looks to them and says, I have soldiers headed for the docks. Get to the clock tower. So they head down to the clock tower. Outside of the clock tower is Spike and various people in suits of armor. Spike, who has no idea they're about to betray them, walks up. Hey, buddies, you made it! He did not make it very long. Petrie got a surprise attack on him, which did quite a bit of damage. At this point, it was initiative. So, what I should have done, and what I did after this session, was I should have had the players roll for Huey, Dewey, and Louie because it was their characters. Instead, I rolled for Huey, Dewey, and Louie, which means I was rolling for Spike, Huey, Dewey, Louie, and 4 sets of animated armor. This combat took a while, so all of the players immediately rushed Spike. He actually rolled pretty low in initiative, so he didn't even go till he was already getting his ass beat. And that poor guy got 1 attack in this entire round of combat. But it was the new player Ducky who managed to do the killing blow, and Spike's head lobbed right off of his body. So the rest of the combat was them fighting animated armor. Now, there's not necessarily anything wrong with animated armor, but something you need to understand, because it's literally armor, their armor class is 18. So that means if you have a lower party that has a little bit of trouble hitting that high, this combat's going to take forever. And they don't even really hit that hard either, so you're just kind of going back and forth. And I, for whatever reason, couldn't roll to save my life, so I'm just sitting there rolling like crazy. The armor's not hitting anything. Huey, Dewey, and Louie is not hitting anything. And Ducky, which is a pattern you will see throughout this entire series, either cannot hit at all or will critical hit. There is no middle ground for that guy. Eventually, and mercifully, the combat came to a close. Now, Spike had mentioned that he had an inn to get him inside of the clock tower. They walk into the clock tower, and they're greeted by Manny. Manny had sold them out. He was one of the revolutionaries. He had told those 2 people on the road where to find them. So they felt genuinely betrayed by this because they actually liked Manny. They punched him in the face, knocked him out, dragged him back to Vulpes. On the way back, however, they managed to loot Spike's body. On Spike's person, he had a short sword. It had very intricate golden writing written on the hilt. Now, Petrie says, look, because this belongs to Spike, I'm going to throw this in the river. And Hork says, dude, no, wait, we can at least sell it. That's gold. To which Petrie said, okay, you know what, fair enough. And just to make things interesting, they also stole a barrel of black powder and dragged it into Frank's Inn. As they walked inside, I said, Frank looks at you with a bit of concern that you're bringing high explosives into an enclosed area. To which Hork says, I give him 5 gold. He looks the other way. So they bring Manny to Vulpes. He's disappointed but not entirely surprised and tells them to go to bed for the night. And that's where this session ended. If you've noticed by my tone in this video, I was not at all happy about how this session went. Looking back on it, it really wasn't that bad, but at the time, I was really not happy about that. And that's largely because I, as the DM, had made quite a few mistakes. And really, it's okay to make mistakes. I mean, that's really the only way you're gonna learn. But at the same time, I really was not pleased. So let's go over some mistakes I made personally. First off, as I had already mentioned, I should not have given them 4 fully statted fighters. So from here on out, I kinda had to make the encounters tougher, which wasn't entirely fair, unfortunately, because these players are still at 3rd level, the fighters are at 4th level, so I've got to figure out something to challenge them and not make the combat encounters a complete and utter pushover. Stay tuned for the next episode as to how I screw that up entirely. Now on to the matter of Petrie telling Hork and Ducky they couldn't come with him. Now, As strange as it is, this is the complete opposite of metagaming. Metagaming would be saying, hey look, I know in character you would probably kill these guys, but can we just agree for now you won't do that? But he's stuck completely in character, which on the one hand is admirable, but at the same time, I didn't have anything for these guys to do. They were just sitting there looking through the player's manual at what kind of weapons they wanted to pick up and trying to pool their money together to buy the inn. I mean, I was kind of hard on myself about that, but I'm really not sure how I could have handled that. Like, the best idea I could come up with would be to just say, okay, time out, guys. Look, are you actually going to kill those people if you go there? And what's even more interesting is these guys have played before multiple times, so I kind of figured they would have had an understanding of, yes, we're going to play in character, but we're not going to actively screw each other over. I was young and naive at the time. I guess the other solution would have been giving Hork and Ducky something to actively do, and I actually kind of did try to steer them over there by having Frank say, well, personally, I wouldn't put up with that. It didn't take. Then there was the matter of Littlefoot's oath. Now, I do feel like I handled that okay, but at the same time, that went way longer than it should have. And I probably should have just stopped that out way quicker than it should have gone. But that's kind of my fault because actually, even now, I don't know what the oath actually says. I should really read what these players' oaths are. But that's kind of my playstyle as the DM, because right now I do have an agreement with the players where it is your responsibility as the player to understand how your character works. Now, I'll help you if you don't understand something or if you have a question, but do not ask me what your abilities are, what your spells are, what your damage is, unless you are a brand new player, because I'm sorry, but I've got a lot to run on the back end here. I can't keep track of all of that. Paladins very often get a very bad rap, and the longer I play this session, the more I understand that. And probably the biggest problem I made was Spike is a 9th level rogue. Now you may be wondering, how did they take out a 9th level rogue in 2 rounds of combat? Well, it's easy. I statted him on OrcPub. Now, OrcPub is a website that lets you stat your characters, and that's actually really helpful. However, due to licensing issues, you can't put any of the feats or abilities in there. You have to look in the player's handbook and add them manually. I didn't know that. So effectively, Spike had the skills and hit points of a 9th level rogue, but that was it. And that was a shame because I was planning on Spike being a bit of a recurring character, but they did have me roll a d20 after the fact to determine how many relatives he has. He has 5 relatives. As far as they know, the next one they run into is going to be Spook. And I guess what really upset me about this particular session was they really did not make any progress in the plot. This entire session, they're trying to go to war, but they are no closer. Now granted, that isn't my fault. I'm not the players. And knowing what I know now, I probably just would have shrugged it off, but at the time it was kind of disheartening. But like I've said, these sessions are a learning experience, and I've definitely learned a lot. I will say, however, the actions taken in this session did continue to help mold the story along, and just wait until you see what happens in the next episode. I'm impressed. It only took 3 sessions to almost get to a total party kill. So thanks for watching, folks, and be sure to tune in to the 3rd episode of First Time DM Diaries, titled, Just Remember, You Did This to Yourself. Be seeing you.